She always sat near the window, where the light fell softly across the classroom. Most days, she listened more than she spoke. Teachers often saw her as polite and well-behaved, but not someone who stood out. She finished her work on time, kept her head down, and never tried to be the center of attention. To many people, she was easy to overlook. The music class was held twice a week. For most students, it was just another subject. Some loved it because it meant less writing. Others enjoyed showing off their confidence. The teacher, who had been teaching music for many years, believed he could quickly tell who had talent and who did not. He trusted his experience more than curiosity. In his mind, talent was loud, confident, and obvious. That day, he walked into the classroom with a clipboard in his hand and announced that there would be a piano performance assessment coming up. Students would have the chance to play a piece in front of the class. Some students smiled with excitement, already imagining the applause. Others looked nervous, unsure if they wanted to perform at all. She felt her heart beat a little faster, but not from fear. Piano was the one place where she felt truly herself. She had been playing since she was very young. At home, the piano was old and slightly out of tune, but it was her escape. When she played, the world felt quiet and safe. She had never played for an audience before, except for family. But she knew what she could do. The teacher began asking students about their experience. One by one, confident hands went up. Some students talked proudly about lessons, competitions, and recitals. The teacher nodded with approval, writing notes beside their names. When he looked around the room, his eyes passed over her without stopping. She raised her hand slowly. The teacher paused, then looked at her, clearly surprised. "Yes?" he asked, his tone polite but unsure. She softly said that she had experience with piano and would like to participate. The room went quiet for a moment. The teacher glanced at her again, this time more carefully, as if trying to see something he had missed before. She wasn't loud. She didn't speak with confidence. She didn't look like someone who wanted attention. He cleared his throat and said, "All right, but I suggest you choose something simple. This assessment is not easy." The words were not cruel, but they were heavy. A few students turned to look at her. Some exchanged small smiles, not mean ones, but doubtful ones. No one expected much. She nodded and quietly said okay. She didn't argue. She didn't explain. She had learned long ago that explaining herself rarely changed anyone's mind. As the class continued, the teacher went on talking about advanced techniques and difficult pieces, clearly directing his attention toward the students he already believed in. She listened carefully, memorizing every detail, every instruction. When the bell rang, students rushed out, chatting excitedly about what they planned to play. She packed her bag slowly. Before leaving, she looked at the piano at the front of the room. It was newer than the one at home, cleaner, brighter. She imagined her fingers on the keys and felt calm. Over the next few days, practice sessions began. The teacher allowed students to come forward during class to try parts of their pieces. Each time, he praised the confident players, corrected small mistakes, and offered encouragement. Applause followed almost every performance. When it was her turn to practice, the teacher checked the time and sighed quietly. "Just a few minutes," he said. "Don't push yourself too hard." She sat down at the piano and placed her hands on the keys. Her fingers felt stiff at first. Playing in front of people was different. She started with a few simple notes, warming up. Before she could continue, the teacher interrupted. "That's enough for now," he said. "You should keep it basic. Focus on timing." She stopped and stood up without complaint. She returned to her seat as the next student walked confidently toward the piano. No one noticed the way her hands slightly trembled as she folded them in her lap. At home that evening, she sat at the old piano again. The keys felt familiar. She played softly at first, then stronger. The piece she was practicing was not simple. It was emotional, detailed, and required control. She had chosen it not to impress anyone, but because it meant something to her. Every note told a story she had never spoken out loud. She practiced late into the night, stopping only when her fingers ached. Her family listened quietly from the other room. They knew this was important to her. At school, The teacher continued to underestimate her. He never asked how her practice was going. He never offered advice. To him, she was just another student filling a slot in the performance schedule. But inside her, something was building. Not anger, not bitterness, determination. She reminded herself that she didn't need approval to be capable. She didn't need permission to be talented. All she needed was one moment. The day of the performance was getting closer, and the classroom buzzed with excitement. Students talked about mistakes they were afraid of making, about how nervous they felt. She listened quietly, her expression calm. No one knew that while they were nervous about performing. She was nervous about being seen for the first time, and deep down, she wondered if anyone would truly listen when she finally played. As the days passed, the classroom began to feel different for her. The closer the performance day came, the more serious everyone became. Some students practiced loudly, wanting others to hear how good they were. Some laughed to hide their nervousness. The teacher walked around with confidence, giving advice here and there, mostly to the same familiar faces. She noticed how easily praise was given to certain students. A few right notes, and the teacher would smile and nod. A confident posture, and he would say things like, "You're a natural," or "You've clearly worked hard." Those words floated through the room, light and encouraging. She absorbed them quietly, not with jealousy, but with awareness. When it came to her, the teacher's tone always changed. It was softer, almost dismissive, like he didn't want to be harsh but didn't expect much either. He would say things like, "Just try your best," or "Keep it simple." He never asked what piece she had chosen. He never asked how long she had been playing. It was as if he had already decided her limits. One afternoon, during practice time, she gathered the courage to approach him. Her hands were cold and her heart was beating fast, but she stood beside his desk and waited for him to look up. "Yes," he said, distracted, flipping through papers. She told him she wanted to play her full piece during the next practice session, just to get feedback. He looked up briefly, then shook his head. "There's not enough time for long pieces," he said. "Besides, you're better off sticking to something easy. Focus on the basics." She nodded again, the same quiet nod she always gave. She thanked him and walked back to her seat. Her face showed nothing, but inside, something sank. Not because she believed him, but because she realized he truly wasn't listening. From that day on, she stopped trying to be seen. She stopped raising her hand. She stopped asking questions. Instead, she watched. She listened. She learned from everything happening around her. She noticed how some students depended heavily on encouragement. When they made mistakes, they laughed nervously and looked toward the teacher, waiting for reassurance. When they played well, they searched the room for approval. She realized how much power attention had. At home, things were different. The piano waited for her every evening, just as it always had. The room was quiet, filled only with the sound of keys and her steady breathing. There were no expectations there. No one telling her what she could or couldn't do. She practiced slowly, carefully repeating difficult sections, until her fingers remembered them without thought. Sometimes she closed her eyes while playing, letting the music guide her. Sometimes she made mistakes and started over without frustration. Piano had taught her patience long before the classroom ever could. Her family noticed the change in her. She spoke even less than before, but her focus was stronger. When she played, there was emotion in every note. They didn't interrupt. They didn't push. They trusted her process. Back at school, whispers began to spread, not about her talent, but about assumptions. Some students wondered why she never played much during practice. A few assumed she was nervous. Others assumed she wasn't good enough. She overheard one quiet comment while packing her bag. Someone said, "I don't think she's ready for this." Another replied, "Yeah, she probably picked an easy song." She didn't react. She had heard worse before. Growing up, she had learned that people often speak from what they see, not from what is true. The teacher finalized the performance order and posted it on the board. Her name was near the end. Not last, but close enough that expectations were already set low. The teacher explained that stronger performers would help set the tone early. She read the list silently and memorized her place. Being near the end didn't bother her. If anything, It gave her more time to breathe. As performance day approached, tension filled the classroom. Students practiced more seriously now. Mistakes felt heavier. The teacher became stricter, correcting even small errors. His standards were high, but only for those he believed in. One day, during a full class rehearsal, a confident student made a mistake and stopped playing. The teacher immediately encouraged them to try again, offering tips and reassurance. Applause followed when they finished. When it was her turn, shortly after, she sat down, played only a small section as instructed, and paused. The teacher waved his hand. "That's fine," he said. "You can stop there. It's no feedback. No correction. No encouragement." She stood up and returned to her seat. Her face remained calm, but her chest felt tight. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. She understood now that nothing she did before the performance would change his opinion. That night, she sat at the piano longer than usual. She didn't rush. She played through the entire piece again and again, feeling every emotion rise and fall. She imagined the classroom, the silence, the faces watching. For a moment, doubt tried to creep in. What if her hand shook? What if she made a mistake? What if no one cared? She stopped playing and took a deep breath. Then she started again, slower this time. She reminded herself why she loved piano in the first place. Not for applause, not for approval, but because it gave her a voice when words failed. The next day at school, the teacher announced that parents and a few staff members would be attending the performances. Excitement filled the room. Some students looked thrilled. Others looked terrified. She felt nervous too, but in a different way. This was no longer just a class assignment. This was a moment. The teacher walked past her desk and reminded everyone to stick to the pieces they had discussed. His eyes briefly met hers, and he added, "Remember, simple is better." She met his gaze and nodded. Inside, she felt steady. She knew something no one else did. She knew that sometimes being underestimated is not a weakness. It's a quiet advantage. And as the final days counted down, she carried that truth with her, waiting for the moment when the piano keys would finally speak for her. The morning of the performance arrived quietly, almost too quietly. She woke up before her alarm, lying still in bed as the early light slipped through the curtains. Her stomach felt tight, but her mind was clear. This was the day everything she had practiced for would finally come together. She got ready slowly, taking extra care with small things, as if staying calm depended on them. At breakfast, no one rushed her. Her family noticed the seriousness in her eyes and kept their words gentle. Someone wished her luck, but she only smiled softly. Luck wasn't what she was relying on. When she stepped out of the house, she paused for a moment, took a deep breath, and reminded herself to stay grounded. At school, the hallway felt louder than usual. Students talked in quick, excited voices. Some practiced finger movements in the air. Others kept repeating the first few notes of their pieces under their breath. Posters had been moved aside, chairs arranged neatly in rows, and the piano sat at the front of the room, polished and waiting. When she entered the classroom, she noticed parents and a few teachers already seated. Their quiet conversations filled the room with a low hum. The music teacher stood near the piano, checking his list, looking confident and prepared. He smiled at a few familiar students and gave them encouraging nods. She took her seat near the back and placed her bag at her feet. Her hands were cold, so she rubbed them together gently. She looked around, taking everything in. This was the room where she had been overlooked, where her voice had been quiet, where assumptions had been made. Today, she would sit at the same piano everyone else would, but the story would be different. The teacher called the class to order and explained how the performances would go. Each student would come forward when their name was called, play their piece, and return to their seat. He reminded everyone to remain respectful and quiet. The first performance began. A confident student walked up, smiled at the audience, and played a familiar piece. It was clean and well practiced. The room filled with polite applause. The teacher nodded with satisfaction and made a small note on his paper. One by one, students performed. Some played beautifully, some made small mistakes, but all were met with encouragement. The room stayed warm and supportive. She listened carefully, not comparing herself, but paying attention to the atmosphere. Her heartbeat stayed steady. As time passed, her turn came closer. She felt a slight pressure in her chest, not fear, but awareness. She straightened her posture and focused on her breathing. She didn't look at the teacher. She didn't look at the audience. She stayed with herself. Then her name was called. For a brief second, everything seemed to pause. She stood up slowly and walked toward the piano. Her steps were calm, even though she could feel dozens of eyes on her. The teacher glanced at her and gave a small, polite smile. It was the same look he had always given her kind, but unsure. She sat down on the bench and adjusted her position. The piano felt different from the one at home. The keys were smoother, lighter. She placed her hands in her lap for a moment, grounding herself. Before playing, she quietly said the name of the piece she had chosen. There was a slight shift in the room. The teacher looked up sharply. He recognized the title. It was not simple. It was advanced. It required control, emotion, and confidence. His expression changed, just for a moment, but it was enough. A few students exchanged quick glances. Some parents leaned forward slightly. The room grew quieter than before. The teacher hesitated, then nodded. "You may begin," he said. She took a deep breath and placed her fingers on the keys. The first notes were soft, almost gentle. They floated through the room like a question. Her hands moved with care, not rushing, letting the sound settle. The nervous energy she had felt all morning melted away. This was familiar. This was home. As the melody grew, her fingers moved with ease. Each note connected smoothly to the next. There was no hesitation, no stiffness. The music began to fill the room, not loudly, but deeply. The audience grew still. No one whispered. No one shifted in their seat. Even the students who had been restless before now watched quietly. The teacher stopped writing. As the piece progressed, the emotion deepened. There were moments of softness, then sudden strength. Her hands moved faster now, confident and controlled. This was not a performance learned for approval. This was something she had lived with, practiced in silence, felt in her heart. Her face remained calm, but inside she was fully present. Every note carried meaning. Every pause mattered. She wasn't thinking about mistakes or judgment. She was simply telling a story through sound. The room seemed smaller now, as if the music had drawn everyone closer. Parents who had come only to support their own children were now fully engaged. A few leaned forward, eyes wide. Some held their breath without realizing it. The teacher's posture changed. His confident stance softened into stillness. His eyes followed her hands, then her expression. Recognition slowly replaced assumption. When the most intense part of the piece arrived, her fingers flew across the keys. The sound filled the room, strong and clear, but never messy. It was controlled power. Years of quiet practice showed in every movement. Then, slowly, the music began to soften again. The final notes approached gently, like a closing thought. She slowed her hands, letting the last sound linger just long enough before lifting her fingers. The final note echoed briefly, then faded. For a moment, no one moved. The silence was deep and heavy, the kind that follows something meaningful. She kept her hands still, her head slightly lowered. Her heart beat steadily, but her chest felt light. Then the room erupted into applause. It wasn't polite or quick. It was loud, surprised, and full. Some people stood without realizing it. Students clapped harder than they had for anyone else. A few parents exchanged amazed looks. She stood up slowly and turned to face the room. Her cheeks felt warm, but her expression remained calm. She gave a small bow, not dramatic, just respectful. The teacher was clapping too. When the applause finally faded, she walked back to her seat. Her legs felt steady beneath her. As she sat down, a few classmates whispered words of admiration. She nodded politely, still processing what had just happened. The teacher cleared his throat before calling the next name. His voice sounded different now, softer, more careful. As the rest of the performances continued, the energy in the room had changed. The earlier confidence felt quieter now, more thoughtful. The students who played after her did their best, but the memory of her performance stayed present. She listened respectfully, clapping for everyone else, just as she always had. But inside, she felt something new. Not pride in proving anyone wrong, but relief in finally being heard. When the final performance ended, the teacher thanked everyone and asked the audience to give one last round of applause. As people stood and gathered their things, several parents approached her, offering kind words. She smiled and thanked them, feeling slightly overwhelmed but grateful. The teacher approached her near the piano. He looked at her for a moment, as if searching for the right words. "I didn't know," he finally said. His voice was quiet, honest. "You play beautifully." She nodded and thanked him. There was no need to say more. She picked up her bag and walked out of the classroom. The hallway felt different now. Not louder or brighter, just lighter. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't argued. She had simply played. And that was enough. The applause stayed with her even after she left the classroom. As she walked down the hallway, the sound replayed in her mind, not loudly, but clearly. It wasn't the noise itself that mattered. It was what it meant. For the first time, people had listened without deciding who she was beforehand. Outside the classroom, her family waited. When they saw her, their faces said everything before words did. Someone hugged her tightly. Someone else smiled with eyes full of pride. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. They had heard her play before. They already knew. But seeing the reaction of others made the moment feel real in a different way. On the way home, she looked out of the window quietly. The streets passed by like they always did, but she felt changed. Not in a loud or dramatic way. Just steadier. Like something inside her had settled into place. The next school day felt strange at first. When she entered the classroom, conversations paused. A few students looked at her with curiosity. Some smiled. Some nodded. No one laughed. No one whispered. The space around her felt different now. She went to her usual seat near the window and placed her bag down carefully. She noticed that people didn't look past her anymore. They looked at her. Not in an uncomfortable way, but with respect. The teacher walked in a few minutes later. He greeted the class as usual, but his tone was calmer, more thoughtful. As he went over the lesson, he caught her attention once or twice, not with doubt but with interest. When she raised her hand to answer a question, he listened fully. During class, he spoke about music differently than before. He talked about how talent doesn't always show itself in obvious ways. He said some people practice quietly, without recognition, and still carry deep skill. The room was silent as he spoke. She kept her eyes on her notebook, but she heard every word. Later that day, during a break, a few classmates approached her, not all at once, one at a time. Someone said they didn't know she could play like that. Someone else said her performance gave them chills. Another admitted they had been nervous to go after her. She smiled politely and thanked them. She didn't brag. She didn't explain. She didn't need to prove anything anymore. What surprised her most was how her confidence showed up in small ways. She spoke a little clearer in class. She didn't rush her answers. She didn't hide behind her notebook. It wasn't because she wanted attention. It was because she no longer felt the need to shrink. At home, she sat at the piano again that evening. This time, she played without pressure. No performance ahead. No audience waiting. Just her and the keys. The music flowed easily, but it felt different now. Lighter, freer. Over the next few weeks, things continued to shift. The teacher began asking her questions about music theory. He asked her opinion on certain pieces. Once he even asked if she would consider helping another student with practice. She agreed, quietly surprised. Helping someone else felt strange at first. She wasn't used to being seen as someone others could learn from. But as she sat beside the student and explained simple techniques, she realized how much she actually knew. Years of quiet practice had built more than skill. It had built understanding. The classroom atmosphere changed too. The teacher became more careful with his words. He encouraged students differently now. He didn't assume as much. He asked more questions. He listened more. She noticed it most when a shy student raised their hand and spoke softly. The teacher leaned in and listened, instead of brushing them aside. She saw that moment and felt something warm in her chest. If her performance had helped create that change even a little, then it mattered more than applause ever could. One afternoon, the teacher asked her to stay after class. Her heart skipped slightly, but she stayed calm. When the room was empty, he stood near the piano and took a deep breath. "I owe you an apology," he said. She looked at him, surprised by the honesty in his voice. "I made assumptions," he continued. "I thought I could tell who had talent just by how they acted. I was wrong, and I regret not giving you the attention you deserved." She listened quietly. She didn't interrupt. She didn't feel anger, only understanding. He added, "Your performance reminded me why I became a teacher in the first place." She nodded and thanked him for saying that. The conversation ended simply, without drama, but it stayed with her long after she left the room. At school events after that, people recognized her. Some asked if she would play again sometime. The idea made her nervous, but also excited. Not because she wanted to impress anyone, but because she realized she no longer feared being seen. Her family noticed the change too. She laughed a little more. She shared stories from school. She talked about music with new energy. The piano was still her safe place, but now it wasn't her only one. One evening, while practicing, she made a mistake and laughed softly instead of starting over immediately. That small moment meant more than it seemed. She wasn't afraid of mistakes anymore. She knew they didn't erase her worth. She thought back to the first day the teacher suggested she choose something simple. Back then, the words had felt heavy. Now, they felt distant, like a memory from another version of herself. She didn't hate the teacher for it. She understood now that people sometimes see what they expect to see. They confuse quiet with weakness, calm with lack of ability. But she also understood something else. Silence can carry power. Time passed, and the performance became a story people remembered. Not as gossip, but as a moment that shifted perspective. New students heard about it. Some asked her how she learned to play so well. She always answered the same way. "I just kept practicing," she said, even when no one was watching. That was the truth. She didn't change who she was. She didn't become louder or try to stand out. She remained calm, thoughtful, and focused. But now, she carried herself with quiet confidence. And whenever she sat at the piano, whether alone or in front of others, she remembered one important thing. Being underestimated did not define her. How she responded did, and she had chosen to respond with music. Life slowly returned to its normal rhythm, but nothing felt exactly the same anymore. The days still began early, classes still followed the same schedule, and homework still piled up like before. Yet inside her, something had shifted. It wasn't loud confidence or sudden boldness. It was a quiet knowing. She knew who she was now. Even when no one was watching, the piano performance became something people remembered. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was unexpected. Teachers mentioned it in passing. Students talked about it when discussing music class. Some even said it made them think differently about their own abilities. She never brought it up herself. She didn't need to. What mattered more to her were the small changes. The way she walked into class without feeling invisible, the way she raised her hand when she had something to say, the way she no longer questioned whether her voice, spoken or played, deserved space. Music class continued. But the tone had changed. The teacher no longer rushed through explanations. He invited students to share their thoughts about pieces, even if their opinions were unsure or unfinished. He asked questions instead of making assumptions. When someone struggled, he listened before correcting. She noticed how this helped others. Students who once stayed quiet now spoke up. Those who felt overlooked before seemed more relaxed. The room felt safer, more open. She didn't claim credit for this change, but she felt connected to it. One afternoon, the teacher announced an upcoming school event where students could perform if they wanted. It wasn't required, just an opportunity. As he spoke, several students glanced in her direction, waiting to see her reaction. Her first instinct was hesitation. Performing again meant being seen again. But this time the fear felt different. It wasn't about being judged. It was about stepping forward on her own terms. At home that evening, she sat by the piano, but didn't play right away. She rested her hands on the keys and thought about how far she had come. She remembered the days of practicing alone, unsure if it would ever matter. She remembered the feeling of being underestimated and how heavy that once felt. Slowly, she began to play. Not the same piece as before. Something new. Something that reflected who she was now. The sound filled the room, calm and steady. Her family listened from nearby, just as they always had. When she finished, someone asked if she planned to perform at the school event. She paused, then nodded. "I think I will," she said softly. The day of the event arrived, without pressure. There was no competition, no grading. Just students sharing what they loved. The atmosphere felt relaxed. Some played instruments, some sang. Some shared original pieces. When it was her turn, she walked to the piano without rushing. She felt the familiar nerves, but they no longer controlled her. She took a breath and played. The performance was not about proving anything this time. It was about sharing something honest. The music flowed naturally. She felt connected to it. And that connection reached the audience in a quiet way. The applause that followed was warm, but she didn't hold on to it. She smiled, bowed slightly, and returned to her seat feeling peaceful. After the event, a younger student approached her. Their voice was soft, unsure. "I didn't think I was good enough to play," they said, "but seeing you made me want to try." Those words stayed with her longer than any applause ever could. As time passed, she realized that her journey wasn't just about piano. It was about learning to trust herself, about understanding that quiet strength is still strength, about knowing that being overlooked does not mean being unworthy. She still practiced regularly. Some days were good, some were frustrating, but she no longer measured her progress by praise. She measured it by how honest the music felt. The teacher continued to support her growth. But more importantly, he supported others differently now too. He listened. He encouraged. He learned one day, near the end of the school year, shared something with the class. "I've learned that talent doesn't always come with confidence," he said. "Sometimes it comes quietly. And as teachers, as people, we need to be patient enough to see it." She looked down at her desk, a small smile forming. Not because the words were about her, but because they showed growth. Outside of school, life continued to unfold. She faced challenges like anyone else. There were days when doubt returned, when she wondered if she was moving forward or standing still. But now, she had something solid to return to. Music, it reminded her of discipline, of patience, of expression. It reminded her that progress doesn't always look loud or fast. Sometimes it looks like showing up again and again even when no one notices. One evening, she played the old piano at home, the one that had been with her from the beginning. The keys still weren't perfect. Some sounded slightly off, but she loved it anyway as she played. She thought about the version of herself who once sat quietly by the window, unsure if she would ever be seen. She wished she could tell that version one thing: keep going, not because someone will notice, not because it will lead to applause, but because your passion matters, even in silence. She finished the piece and let her hands rest. The room was quiet, peaceful. She didn't know where music would take her in the future. Maybe it would remain a part of her life. Maybe it would lead somewhere new. Either way, she was ready, because she had learned an important lesson. Being underestimated does not mean being incapable. Being quiet does not mean being weak. And being patient does not mean waiting for permission. Sometimes, all it takes is one moment of courage, one choice to sit down, one choice to play. And when that moment comes, the world listens.